They'll try and bend anything to fit their narrative. Creationists, they have some hilarious ideas about gods and evolution, and science explaining both. Creation Ministries International clearly have too much money, as they're about to teach their followers how DNA destroys the theory of evolution, with some high production value content. Prepare to have your mind blown by some real science. Hello, I'm TheSkepTick, the British floating circle that watches people make extraordinary claims, and then I explain why I don't accept what they're saying. Honestly, these videos keep appearing, and all I can think about is how on earth do they have so much money? This week's video has two guys sitting like sportscasters, delivering how DNA proves evolution is wrong. It really does seem like they'll throw money at anything to justify their god, and say anything to convince others that they're right. I'm not entirely sure how DNA destroys evolution, but I'm excited to learn. But before we have our minds blown by some creation science, if this isn't your first skeptic video, hit the like, the subscribe and the bell, and let's blow up the algorithm together. And a super thanks to those that hit super thanks in some recent videos. Condor Boss 3339, Kevin, Lovecat XX, Lark LaTroy, and Kevin again. Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe bestows leaves upon you all. More hen. Go on then, creationists. Tell us how complex DNA demonstrates how evolution is wrong.
Today we're summarizing a great piece of evidence for the creator God of the Bible.
Yes, it's the amazing complexity of the human genome. Today on Creation Magazine Live.
Now, I know you shouldn't pick on people for how they look, especially when your meat form is no oil painting, but this dude on the left's head's on upside down, right?
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. I'm Richard Fangrad.
And I'm Thomas Bailey.
I feel like I'm missing a trick with this, so I'm going to enlist the help of my alter ego, Skeptic 2. Hey, thanks for having me, Skeptic. Hey, look, we've pulled out all the stops for this. Let's take a look.
All right, today we'll be looking at discoveries in genetics that powerfully support that DNA was created and that it could never be the result of millions of years of evolution.
We're also going to explore problems with evolutionary assumptions about DNA, the failed predictions and scientific dead ends that often result when you approach observations with the wrong assumptions.
I don't know who these fellas are, Skeptic 2, but they certainly seem to know their stuff. What is their science background? Well, funny you bring that up, Skeptic. Harry McBeardface here, Dickie Fangrad, is a glorified electrician. And Tom Bailey here, well, he's an actor. You better hope that Creation Magazine has a whole host of science researchers that can help back up what these two presenters have for us. Yeah, I doubt that, but what I'm really intrigued by is the dinosaur skull in the background. Do they just have that there to try and add credibility? Do we need a dino skull in the background too?
Yeah, and along the way we'll reveal some of the mind-bogglingly complex biological machinery associated with DNA. This will be fun. DNA, by the way, is an instruction code for how to build and operate a living thing.
All living things have DNA. Bill Gates, the co-founder of Microsoft, made this statement back in 1995. He wrote, "Human DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created." He wasn't kidding. An organism's genetic material is called a genome. Since Gates made that statement, we have learned that the human genome is way more complex than he or anyone else knew at that time.
And I don't want to say that people in the 90s were stupid because, well, I grew up in the 90s, but we definitely know a lot more now than we did back then. Right, most folks in the late 90s were worried that the world was going to end because computers might not know how to set the year to 00. And even computer graphics were dire then. I spent many hours staring at this thinking it was incredible in 1996.
Yeah, meanwhile, evolutionists continue to maintain that all living creatures, including their DNA, obviously, evolved by random processes, natural processes only over millions of years. No intelligent designer. That's their assumption. Yeah. Our assumption as Bible believers includes what King David wrote, for example, 3,000 years ago.
Well now, one definitely is an assumption. Evolution has mountains of evidence to support it. A god does not. But it's definitely good of them to admit that they are just making an assumption. I guess that's a good place to end the video. I don't know. There could be a lot more ridiculous to come.
For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made.
I don't even remember what I did last week, let alone what happened to me in the womb. Right! How could King David have known that? Babies don't even remember not to poop themselves. Oh, I know that. Baby Skeptic is going through about 12 diapers a day at the moment. Whew, it sounds like the undemonstrated God forgot to knit a poop stopper for that little kid. You're damn right, Skeptic too. You're damn right.
Let's crank the clock back to 1859, long before Bill Gates, when Charles Darwin wrote his book on the origin of species. Now, the thinking back then was that the cell was a fairly simple blob of matter. It's easier to imagine organisms evolving slowly and gradually if they're fairly simple.
Right.
We now know that there are problems with that view. Darwin didn't know anything about genetics.
And Tom does, highly doubtful.
Which really took off shortly after he published. He did, however, famously admit, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down.
Now, while Darwin was referring to organs, we can apply this logic at the molecular level, since, as we mentioned, evolutionists now assert that even DNA formed as a result of random natural processes. For example, biochemist Michael Behe coined the term irreducible complexity. Now, that refers to a system of interacting parts in which every part has to be in place before it can function.
The creationist version of which came first, the DNA or the organism? Right. And sometimes both can be the answer. And Darwin said if. I think we're still waiting for that if to come true.
Now, this means that a system couldn't come into being gradually bit by bit. And there are many examples of this kind of evolution-refuting design in molecular biology.
Here's an example. Life depends on an incredible enzyme called ATP synthase. That's the name of the world's tiniest rotary motor, rotating at up to 7,000 RPM. These are so small that 100,000 would fit side by side in a millimeter.
Yeah, ATP synthase makes ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, the fuel that powers cellular machines. Each of the human body's about 14 trillion cells perform this reaction about 1 million times a minute.
Wow.
Well, that's pretty cool. Yeah, but just know, Skeptic, that they're going to say, I don't understand how this happens naturally, so I'm just going to say a god did it. Well, if they can do that, can I suggest it was Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe leaf be upon her? Hey, I don't see why not. She's just as likely as any of the other gods proposed.
Over half of your body's weight of ATP is made and consumed every day.
A current of protons drives the motor, unlike man-made electric motors, which use electrons. The portion shown here in green is where adenosine diphosphate is combined with a phosphate ion in the presence of a catalyst to produce ATP, which is then released, making way for the next cycle.
This nanomachine exhibits all the characteristics of super intelligent design.
That's right.
You called it. I did. But if it wasn't that system, it would just be something else, surely. And why do creationists get to say that X part of the body is intelligently designed when there are so many parts of the human body that are dumb designs? Why don't you list your top 3, Skeptic 2? Thanks, Skeptic. My top 3 terrible designs in the body are the windpipe and food pipe being a choking hazard and a too narrow pelvis for delivering offspring through. That's only 2, Skeptic 2. Don't bust my balls, Skeptic, which just so happens to be my 3rd. Exterior testicles. Have you ever hit them accidentally? Ho, I'm a floating circle. I have no idea what you're talking about.
ATP is vital for life, and many of these motors were needed before the first living cell could exist. That's an evolutionary impossibility.
That's right, yeah.
How is it an impossibility? Don't just say it and move on. Right, Skeptic. The fact is, ATP did play a huge part in abiogenesis, but actually, when it comes to evolution, it's already there. I think they're getting mixed up in what they're talking about.
Getting back to DNA. In 1962, James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for their discovery of the structure of DNA. That was in 1953. DNA, by the way, stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Now, say that 10 times fast.
Or once for that matter. DNA is the most compact information storage system in the universe. The amount of information that could be stored in just a pinhead's volume of DNA is equivalent to a pile of paperback paperback books 500 times as high as the distance from Earth to the moon, each with a different yet specific content.
A single gram of DNA could store about 215 petabytes, or if you're in the UK, petabytes. That's 1.21 gigawatts, or no, it's 215 million gigabytes.
Either way, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
All of that information is stored in a double helix molecule made up of 4 chemical letters: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, or A, C, G, and T. It's already a huge problem for evolutionists to explain how these chemical letters could arise spontaneously from a so-called primordial soup of non-living chemicals.
Wait, do they really think that alphabet spaghetti just spawned out of nothing? It would appear so, Skeptic. The letters just represent the names given to the chemicals. If no one had discovered those chemicals, then DNA would just be made up of blank, 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 and blank. Right. Imagine if you or I had named those chemicals. What would you have called them? Ringo, Paul, George, and John, obviously. Obviously. And this is why we're not scientists.
But it gets better.
Better for us, worse for the evolutionists. In the protein coding areas of the genome, these 4 letters are arranged in 3-letter combinations called codons, sort of like words in a human language. Now, consider that if you change one letter in a word, you either get gibberish, you get nothing, or you could get a different meaning, like changing, for example, C-A-T to C-A-R in English. That's a different meaning. Right. But the letters themselves don't mean anything unless they're translated. For example, in English, the letters G-I-F-T mean a present. That's something nice. Right. But that same sequence of letters in German, which is my first language, means poison.
Ouch. Not something you want to find under the Christmas tree.
No.
Now, each 3-letter codon codes for one protein letter called an amino acid. And there are a total of 64 possible codons. But there are only 21 different amino acids coding for proteins. Well, this means that more than one codon can be used for any particular amino acid.
Yeah, but why so much duplication? As cells divide and DNA gets copied, copying errors or mutations occur. Sometimes letters get put in the wrong place, but this apparent duplication means that in many cases, one letter can get changed and still result in the production of the correct amino acid. And that is brilliant engineering by the creator God of the Bible.
Or, it's just how chemicals work. Right, but why do they get to say it was the creator God of the Bible? Even if we were to accept that it was a creator, why is their creator the correct one? I guess that's just because they were taught to believe in it.
Not only that, even if an error results in the wrong amino acid being selected, it will often have characteristics similar to the correct one.
Yeah, amazing.
Wow, amino acids all being similar. Who'd have thunk it? Not me, Skeptic. Not me.
Well, this is just one of the design features in DNA, and we'll talk about more of them after the break.
And then comes a quick commercial they made about Creation Ministries. And I'm not kidding, I think I know the British female voice that ends their commercial. Yeah, pretty ridiculous if you ask me. Anyway, back to the video.
Welcome back. This is fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's talk about more design features surrounding DNA. Now, these are things that are very difficult for evolution to explain.
Or they're not, and these creationists just say God did it because they don't accept it. I know which one's the most likely.
You may have heard about the infamous Miller-Urey experiment back in 1953, in which electricity was added to certain gases under specialized conditions. This was intended to show how life could spontaneously arise without God.
Right.
But the experiment actually showed that it took a great deal of intelligence to set up conditions that produced mostly a lot of tar and just a few amino acids.
Yeah.
This is a long way from a living cell.
That's how they explain it away, that it took intelligence to set up a replica of conditions. And then they say it didn't work anyway, even though it did. Right. So which is it? It took intelligence just like a supposed god, or it didn't work, so it wasn't intelligently set up. I want to go down and wipe that weird smug look off his face.
Yeah, here are some of the problems with that experiment. First, there were starting assumptions about what gases would have been present on the primordial Earth, and these didn't include oxygen, which tends to destroy chemical bonds, preventing anything from forming.
No oxygen, right? I'm not sure they know what the O in H2O stands for, but it isn't orgasm. Maybe it stands for, oh no, I wish I'd paid more attention in school.
Now, since then, evidence indicates that oxygen likely was present at the time.
Oops.
So because it didn't accurately simulate the Earth's atmosphere, it's pretty much irrelevant as an experiment.
You know what is irrelevant, these folks' opinions, because they can't demonstrate a god? You know it. I do.
And those amino acids could not have formed.
Not only that, many molecules required for life exist in two forms that look like mirror images of each other, like your left and right hands. This is called chirality, from the Greek word for hand. The Miller-Urey experiment produced equal amounts of left and right-handed forms of amino acids.
Yeah, but all amino acids and proteins are left-handed, while all sugars in DNA and RNA and in metabolic pathways are right-handed.
And your misunderstanding of what's going on and presenting science that can easily be replicated as false is backhanded. Oh, now that's a good one. Ha, thanks.
Random chemical reactions won't produce 100% left-handed amino acids that are needed for life.
This is just one example of thousands where evolutionists have major problems explaining how life originated.
Yeah.
But evolution continues to be promoted as established scientific fact. It's not.
No.
Evolution and abiogenesis are not the same, and evolution has more evidence for it than any other scientific theory. Just saying it's not doesn't mean it's not. It just means you're wrong, Dick and Tommy. Why is it only now that I've realised we need someone called Harry to join them? Then we can make some jokes about Tom, Dick and Harry.
Let's move on to another evolutionary problem. Discoveries in genetics refutes the idea of ape to human evolution.
Well, we can stop you there. Right. It's not ape to human, it's ape-like to modern ape species, of which humans are a member. Did we just agree with some creationists? I think we did, kinda.
The neo-Darwinian theory of evolution says that all life on Earth arose from a common ancestor by way of random mutations to genes preserved by natural selection. Organisms with beneficial mutations produced more offspring than those with deleterious or damaging mutations. Some beneficial mutations provided adaptations to new or changed environments, producing new kinds of organisms. In order to get extra new information to build more complex organisms, existing genes must have been duplicated and then mutated into something useful.
Right, but population geneticist J.B.S. Haldane realized that when a beneficial mutation occurs in a population, the number of copies of that mutation must increase over time for the population to progress evolutionarily. It has to substitute for the non-mutated genes in the population. But the rate at which this can happen is limited. Haldane realized that there hasn't been enough time to accumulate enough beneficial mutations to transform an ape-like creature into a human.
This became known as Haldane's dilemma.
But Haldane only looks at one factor for evolution, right? Well, as far as we're aware, yeah. If it was just mutated genes, then maybe he'd be correct. But since there are many factors that contribute to evolution, we could just skip over this and say, sorry, boys, but evolution happens.
And he explained it like this. Imagine a population of 100,000 ape-like creatures 10 million years ago, more than the supposed time since the last common ancestor of humans and apes. Suppose a male and a female both received a mutation so beneficial that they survived while the 99,998 all died out. Then they had enough offspring to replenish the population of 100,000 in one generation.
Ooh, okay.
If anyone believes that's how it works, then they're stupid. Absolutely. Their offspring will have a chance of receiving the mutation. If the mutation is beneficial, it's likely to help the offspring succeed and pass on their mutation. And 20 years seems a little long. Maybe make it 10, just like chimps.
If this repeated every 20 years for 10 million years, there would be 500,000 beneficial mutations added to the population. This amounts to only 0.02% of the human genome. Now, even the old myth of 1 to 2% difference between human and chimp DNA wouldn't work. But we know the difference is actually at least 5% or as much as 15%.
Yeah.
We did an entire episode on this subject titled Chimp to Human DNA, less similar than previously reported.
Which might mean, maybe, we're not as different as you'd like, boys. Right? I think it's kind of cool that we can see similarities in other apes. So what?
Yeah, now obviously Haldane put forward an incredibly unlikely scenario here. He calculated a more realistic scenario would be one beneficial mutation about every 300 generations on average. for a total of 1,667 beneficial mutations over 10 million years. That's nothing.
Definitely not enough.
No.
Really? Not enough? Maybe not for you both, but maybe it is enough to have significant differences. Exactly. Just saying it's wrong is, well, wrong.
Even if the 1% difference were true, we'd need 30 million beneficial mutations, which would take about 9 billion generations, or 180 billion years.
Yeah.
That's about 13 times the supposed age of the universe, according to the Big Bang Theory.
Right, but only if mutation was the only factor in evolutionary theory. Thankfully, it's not skeptic. Thankfully.
Evolutionists would need to stretch out the age of the universe in order to allow for human evolution, never mind everything else.
Yeah, don't give them any ideas.
Right. Of course, God didn't need anywhere near that much amount of time.
No.
Back to Haldane's dilemma. Since only 2% of human DNA codes for proteins, it was assumed that the other 98% was non-functional and was eventually labeled junk DNA.
Yeah.
This appeared to solve the problem, since there could be all kinds of neutral mutations in the junk DNA with no significant damage to the organism. Junk DNA was not just an arbitrary label, it was mathematically necessary for evolution to occur.
Yeah, and this led to an unfortunate lack of research into the majority of the genome. Yeah. Junk DNA was assumed to be a result of evolution by mutation and was then used as proof of evolution. It's a bit of circular reasoning there.
Like vestigial organs.
Yes.
About 100 years ago, there were around 100 body parts labeled vestigial. No one knew what these parts were for, so they were assumed by evolutionists to be leftovers or vestiges from a previous stage in human evolution. They were then used as evidence for evolution. This hindered research into these organs for many years. But guess what? Almost all of those vestigial organs have since been found to have a purpose, as if they were designed.
Nice.
Fearfully and wonderfully made. I love it when science catches up with the Bible.
Yeah.
But what are those vestigial structures? Let me help you out there, skeptic. There's the appendix, which is for when we digest all the grass we eat. Oh, I love me some grass. Then there's the coccyx to support our massive tails. Hey, my coccyx, but only when I pull it too much. And my personal favourite, the wisdom teeth, for when we need excruciating mouth pain because our jaws aren't big enough anymore. Fortunately, I'm not wise enough for wisdom teeth.
It's the same with junk DNA. Evolutionists' assumptions hindered research. It took a while, but in 2003, finally, the ENCODE project, which stands for Encyclopedia of DNA Elements, began studying just 1% of the human genome, including areas that did and did not code for protein. They found that 80% of so-called junk DNA has a function.
Wow.
Who knew?
Pretty much everybody, or else we'd just be blobs on the floor.
Lead analysis coordinator Ewan Burney said, "It's likely that this 80% will go to 100%, said Burney. We don't really have large chunks of redundant DNA. This metaphor of junk isn't that useful," he said.
So Haldane's dilemma still hasn't been solved, not even close. When we come back, we'll talk about how the human genome codes in 4 dimensions.
I feel like at this point it's got to be satire. Do these fellas really think that their smug demeanour is what will convince folks that science is wrong? I feel like that's a great place to end it, as I don't think I can put up with their ignorance anymore. If it is that. Or maybe they're just being willfully dishonest, skeptic. But thanks for having me. Did these fellas blow your mind with their breakdown of DNA? Or did they blow your mind with how ridiculous it is that they try to bend science to fit religion? Let me know in the section below. I'm going to skeptic this as creationists still being a little ridiculous. A big thank you to this month's top-level ticks on Patreon. Godless Granny, Addy Rockart, The Enixes, Jakari, Elizabeth, Whiskey Tech Fred, Rick and Travis, as well as all the $3 base ticks. You can become a supporter on Patreon too at patreon.com/TheSkepTick. The link is in the description, along with links to all my other socials. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. From me, The Skeptic, stay safe, keep thinking logically and ask questions. Skepticism is the first step towards truth. See you next Saturday.